Now, the distinction between these three types of stories can be a little difficult to unravel sometimes. I'm going to tell you a story now about a man named Odysseus. The Romans called him Ulysses. That's why you see the L for Latin, Ulysses. Ulysses is his Roman name. Odysseus is his Greek name. He's the same guy. Okay. Odysseus and his men are making their way home from the Trojan War. That war that we're going to be talking about more at the end of the semester. That war that was so important in shaping Greek culture. Well, they're on a boat. They're on a boat making their way back home. You had that short discussion or short essay or whatever it was for last week about the importance of the sea in Greek culture. Okay, so Odysseus and his men are sailing back home. But they get hungry. They sail by an island, so they go on the island to find out if there's any food on the island. They find a cave on the island. They go inside the cave, and hanging from the walls are just all kinds of good food. I mean, there's got bacon just hanging from the walls, Snickers bars and key lime pies just laid out on a big table. And so the men just start chowing down. When the guy who owns the cave comes home, this guy who owns the cave is one of a supernatural monster called a Cyclops. Here is there we go. Here is a picture of a sculpture of what the ancient Greeks thought a Cyclops would look like. They have one eye in the middle of their forehead, and they're big, they're huge, okay? Well, this particular Cyclops is named Polyphemus. Polyphemus is the Cyclops whose cave Odysseus and his men have entered and are now eating his food. So Polyphemus comes in, he sees these guys, he grabs one of them and throws him in his mouth and eats him. That's how big this guy is. But eventually Polyphemus kind of settles down, and he's not grabbing them, but he's very angry. Okay, and so he asks Odysseus what his name is. Odysseus says his name is Utus. Utus is a Greek word that means nobody, no one. The Romans called the Latin word that means nobody is Nemo. You may have run across Captain Nemo in a Jules Verne novel, actually two Jules Verne novels, 1,000 Years Under the Sea, which is about a submarine, and then my mind's gone blank. There's another one about a balloon. Anyway, the characters encounter Captain Nemo, all right, but it means nobody. And Odysseus says, we didn't know this food belonged to anybody. Right. One thing we're going to be talking about is whether Odysseus is an honest man or a liar when we talk about him, or whether he exaggerates, let's just say. And Odysseus says, let me run to the ship and I'll get something to pay for the food. And so he runs back to the ship and he grabs all the bottles of wine that he can. And he comes back and he opens one up, and Polyphemus says, what is that? And Odysseus says, this is wine. Polyphemus doesn't know anything about wine. This is one of the little details in the story which is going to be significant when we get to that part of the story. I'm not going to worry about that part of the story now. Anyway, so he chugs down 1 bottle of wine, and 2 bottles of wine, and 3 bottles of wine, and 4 bottles of wine, and Polyphemus says, Utus, you're the best friend a man of a Cyclops ever had. I'm going to be your friend, and I'm going to take good care of you. I'm going to eat you last. And Odysseus says, okay, here, have some more wine, Polyphemus. And so eventually Polyphemus passes out. When he passes out, Odysseus takes a wooden stake and he sharpens it, and he holds it in the fire until the tip gets carbonized and hardened, and then he shoves the stake right into Polyphemus's eye socket. They escape from the cave, they start running towards their ship, and Polyphemus comes staggering out of the cave. He's blinded now because his one eye's been put out, and he starts hollering at the other Cyclops for help. And he says, are you ready for the punchline? He says, nobody is getting away! Nobody attacked me! And all the other Cyclops holler back at him, then why are you making so much noise? And Polyphemus says, you don't understand, nobody is getting away! And the other Cyclops say, then what are you upset about? That's Bronze Age humor. Yes, it's a corny, stupid joke, okay? But that's the punchline of the whole story. Well, Odysseus hears Polyphemus hollering that nobody, Utis, is getting away, and Odysseus hollers back and says, I'm not nobody, I am King Odysseus. Well, what Odysseus doesn't realize is that the Cyclops are the children of a Greek god named Poseidon. Actually, I should have put Neptune up there as the Roman name. Poseidon is the god of the sea, the god of the ocean. And Poseidon happens to be the father of all the Cyclops, including, of course, Polyphemus. And so Polyphemus calls out to his father Poseidon and says, King Odysseus has blinded me. And so now Poseidon is going to make life terrible for Odysseus and his men as they make their way back home. So, it's, which category would we fit that story into? I mean, it's a legend in the sense that it takes place in a historical time period that's connected to a historical war, which really did happen in our historical time. It involves supernatural monsters, however, and that's an element of divine myth. It involves the god Poseidon, who's a really big god. And it also kind of fits into folklore, in that there's a moral to the story. What do you think the moral of the story here is? There are several. Let me give you a few. Don't steal. That's a good moral to the story. Sometimes it's smart to keep your mouth shut. When somebody is hollering, nobody is getting away, don't turn around and call out your name. Or else they might be connected to somebody who's going to cause trouble for you. Maybe you thought of another one. But there are several moral lessons to be learned from the story. So these categories of stories are interesting to think about and useful, but sometimes they there's a lot of back and forth, okay, in these types of stories.